Hey, Bitcoin Wealth Builders, Simon Dixon here, and welcome to episode 106 of Bitcoin Hard Talk. Today, we're going to be discussing, and it's a bit of a stretch, but I think if you watch right till the end, you're actually going to see the connections. But what is the link between the announcement of 50-year mortgages, the correction in the market, the quote-unquote AI bubble, and Al-Qaeda boss visiting the White House next to Donald Trump? We're going to be discussing it, as always, in three different sections. This week in Bitcoin, this week in macro, and this week in geopolitics. If you are new to the show, welcome. My name is Simon Dixon. I spent the last 25 years of my life connecting the dots between money, investing, and then later Bitcoin as well. And we're going to be going through the different three parts of the show today. The main theme of this week in Bitcoin is we're going to be having a little bit of a look at the controversy and the war between China and US over who owns the 127,000 Bitcoin that the US decided to confiscate. Then in part two, we're going to be doing this week in macro. In this week in macro, we're going to be going through, are the 50-year mortgages a bank bailout? How to utilize them so that you can reverse the effect of the bank bailout, and also answering the question once and for all, are we in an AI bubble, and what is driving the markets right now, particularly during this crash, and what we expect to come next. In part three, we're going to be doing this week in geopolitics. And in this week in geopolitics, we're going to be making sense over everything we've been covering over the months, years at Bitcoin Hard Talk in the geopolitical section. And we're going to be tying it all together. It was a very symbolic meeting. And we're going to be going through a blog that I also posted, as well as what happened this week in geopolitics, from 9/11 to the White House. So let's jump right in. We got a great show today, and we're going to be covering everything around that. So this week in Bitcoin, China versus the US, and who owns the 127,000 Bitcoin. We're going to take a real look around the world today. We're going to go from China to Europe to the Middle East to America and look at everything that happened this week in Bitcoin, because it was a pretty packed week as well. So look, firstly, I just want to say to you, congratulations on the opportunity to buy Bitcoin at below $100,000 again. For those that watch my show and the long-term listeners, you know we completely ignore price. So while everybody is trying to clickbait you into saying things that wind you up and fear you into selling your Bitcoin, and then later you ending up in some Wall Street financial product, we tell you, we relax. We don't care about the price. The same thing I've been telling everybody for 14 years on this channel, ever since Bitcoin was $3. Own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month. Ignore the price and value your wealth in Bitcoin. When you value your wealth in Bitcoin, you love it when the price goes down, as most people that understand this in my community, the further the price goes down, the more you get to work your fiat currency and buy some cheaper Bitcoin when you own some more Bitcoin this month. And you want this to go on for as long as possible, because we are transitioning to this world of Bitcoin AI, central bank digital currencies, and stable coins. And we're obviously protecting ourselves. You have a 4-year challenge. Do it for 4 years and come back to me and tweet me on X in 4 years and let me know how you got on. I have never met anybody that didn't outperform, and I can't promise this will happen again, but I can tell you what I'm doing. I have not met anybody that did not thank me. And I'm talking from people that went from nothing to billionaires and millionaires and everything in between. So let's make sure that you congratulate yourself on being able to get some Bitcoin below $100,000, and you're chillax while everybody else is freaking out. It's just a correction in line with the market. I've watched my $30 Bitcoin crash to $3. I've watched my $20,000 Bitcoin crash to $3,000. I've watched my $70,000 Bitcoin crash to $17,000. And now I've seen my $125,000 Bitcoin correct to $96,000. Don't worry about it. The further it goes down, the more you get to buy with your fiat currency. Now, let's contrast that with what's happening with fiat currency. Bitcoin is the boycott and the offboard. So let's take a look at Europe before we go into China, Dubai, and various other Czech Republic and America as well. Europe's biggest monetary kind of overhaul since 1999, right before the 2000 dot-com boom and bust, when my father lost all of his savings. And then I answered the question for him when he asked me, son, what happened to my money in year 2000? Well, a year before that, we had an overhaul around fiat currency. We entered into this dot-com boom and bust era. My father lost all of his money, everything he'd ever worked for, from rags to getting his first £1,000,000 and then losing absolutely everything. And that answering that question took me to Bitcoin and speaking at the first Bitcoin conference in 2011 and writing the very first published book in the world to include Bitcoin, and then investing in over 100 companies that made the industry. So anyway, what's happening in Europe with the euro? Well, if you hadn't noticed, Europe is a train wreck. And we'll go through more in the geopolitical section, but there was escalations in the Ukraine-Russia war. Remember, any long-term listeners, you'll know that the Russia-Ukraine war is in fact a war between the financial industrial complex and Europe in order to strategically weaken Europe so that BlackRock and Blackstone can acquire all those resources and Russia ends up with more territory. And sadly, the evil proof of weapons network that cares nothing about humans' life is going to make a lot of money at the expense of Ukrainian lives and Russian lives. That's what the proof of weapon works. And that's why we boycott into peaceful proof of work. But anyway, what's happening in Europe? So by 2027, and that will come by very fast, it'll be 2026 before you know it, the European Union is restructuring money again. It's reinventing money. It's going to do, its official goal is to stop the $700 billion in annual money laundering. Now, anybody that's watched my show knows that the money laundering is in fact done by the banksters, in the banksters, protected by the intelligence agencies, for the system, by the system, and they pay the government, and they have black op operations outside the system. And so they're not coming after money laundering. They're coming after your money. And they want to make sure that they have some more controls around that, because they want them to do, those that control the government is the large banksters, and they do the money laundering. But then they have to put all these pretense and regulations because the chosen banks still get to be Jeffrey Epstein's banksters, and they get to pay the $285 million fine that JP Morgan paid when it was connected to all the Epstein controversies that are currently still being weaponized in order to give more control to banks. But anyway, the unofficial consequences is obviously more control, more surveillance. We are ushering it in the West, a surveillance state, now that the proof of weapons network controls the US, the European Union, the UK, Israel, Australia, Canada, and it's deciding whether China or US is going to be in charge of parts of the global South that are near America. Sadly, Venezuela and various other regions and Europe are going to be sacrificed to the proof of weapons network unless they move east. If they carry on west, they will be the victim of the military industrial complex and the forever war model now that they are retreating from further afield because of rising powers. So there are three pillars of the new system that the euro is going to be. And remember, we've always talked about it on Bitcoin Hard Talk. Because the Bank for International Settlements created the European Union in order to create the European Central Bank to print money via unelected officials in order to redistribute money via NATO and the euro dollar into the US stock market to pump up the price of the banks and financial institutions that are controlled by the asset managers like BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. Europe is just a vassal state for printing money, pumping money into the stocks. And so what do they want? They know that when you create the environment of a K-shaped economy, it gets to civil unrest. When you have civil unrest, you take the proof of weapons network, financial weapons of mass destruction that they beta tested in the war zones like Gaza, occupation as a service, in West Bank, and integration with drones in Ukraine. and they put it into a central bank digital currency so that the European Central Bank can control all the European countries and make them beg for forgiveness. Right now, the UK is flying in terms of its interest rate on its long-term bonds as it gets completely wrecked by these covert operations to acquire the whole country on the cheap. So what is the first thing they're going to be doing? Well, the first thing is a cash ban. And so cash payments over $10,000 euros are going to be completely illegal once this is implemented. The second thing that they're going to be doing is they're going to require crypto identity mandate. So this is where MiCA, the markets in crypto assets, is going to basically wipe out any type of anonymous wallets, make you put it through the exchanges, put it through the custodians, and drive you into BlackRock's euro-denominated Bitcoin ETF rather than you owning Bitcoin in self-custody. And so you got to get your self-custody. And obviously, they're going to be doing Know Your Customer, which is how they get the data that they want in order to implement their control mechanism. The third is the digital euro. So they're taking the euro that is currently created by the private banks, and the European Central Bank is waging war on the European banks by actually having their own creation, the European Central Bank digital dollar. And so the central bank gets to create the digital euro into its network of European banks, and they have programmable money, which is a central bank digital currency, in order to have a state-backed digital currency where they say that they're going to have privacy features. We will watch what those privacy features are, but I'm expecting fully programmable and traceable money in a central bank digital currency. Now, what we've always said is that the BlackRock and the financial institutions and the banksters, the financial industrial complex, is going to turn Europe, UK into a surveillance state with a central bank digital currency. And then America is going to be privatized into programmable stable coins integrated with covert social credit scores through the vast technical industrial complex. So that all the profits from government-controlled Europe, UK, funnel up to privatized controlled America, and they are owned by the banks. And the banks are pushing the K-shaped economy, manufacturing civil unrest so that they can acquire the assets on the cheap. So they obviously, because in America, the banks are the shareholders of the Federal Reserve, they want to usher it all up, privatize it, and then manufacture the type of environment in the economy that just benefits rules by banks while they reset the world order, as we're witnessing right now, by controlling those capital flows. And the digital euro in the European Central Bank and is the next phase in the plan. Now, anybody that has been watching this for the long term, you'll know that even in my book in 2011, I discussed digital currencies and central bank digital currencies and how they're created by banks, and they would have been preparing for this. We're getting closer and closer and closer. So the European Union is essentially balancing between the China surveillance model, but the difference is in China, at least people know what they're signing up for. It's not a civil unrest country. It's not a left versus right divide. It's got the money that is created. It goes into a state banking system and then is reinvested in building China via a China first policy. In Europe, it just goes into the private sector, and then it goes up to America, where the banks essentially work against the American people, against the European people, against the British people, even against the other members and nodes on the proof of weapons network. And so they know that they need surveillance money, and they beta tested, lockdowns and all sorts of stuff, got us all on the tech. But the European version is where you have the China model, but for private profits by banksters that get to create the digital euro, the digital dollar, and the digital pound, and the Canadian pound, and the Mexican, dollar as well. But at the same time, they can then use the equivalent of Russian sanctions, but on the people, integrated with carbon credits, with various other mandates, and they can implement through financial punishment or reward how you spend your money. And then doing things like weaponizing the US dollar, which is what they do through the payment rails like Visa, MasterCard. And essentially, they're painting it that they're giving Europeans some freedom from America. That's the narrative that they need. But we know that it all goes up to the same network, which is currently hosting itself in the American capital markets and Wall Street, but is hedging now and starting to set up more and more of its offices in the Middle East at the moment as well. So the digital euro essentially aims to reduce dependency upon the US is the narrative and the US payment rails. But we know that this is just creating a covert network for financial weapons of mass destruction. Surveillance is the infrastructure that will be built. And we know that once surveillance is built, it lasts forever. It doesn't go back. Think Patriot Act, you needed 9/11. We're going to be covering more of that in the political section. Then you have fear manufactured, drive the change. And then when you drive the change, in order, you end up with something that lasts forever. So today they'll be telling you that we're doing this in order to stop criminals. So why do you think those borders are opened? Why do you think they're creating religious and racial tensions? Why do you think they're creating all of these different operations? Because they need violence so that then they can say, right, we're going to come in and stop the crime with digital ID. They've already tested that by saying we're going to use it on immigrants. And so you think that, that will be the narrative. And then tomorrow it will just be used for basically tax control, so that you will pay tax upon payment on a guilty until proven innocent system where you'll have to collect it afterwards. And then you'll have negative interest rates or positive interest rates integrated into artificial intelligence and social credit scores in order to drive the different types of behavior, so they can drive your spending not only through debt slavery, but also through central bank digital currencies and stable coins into the companies that they want to pump up or take off the proof of weapons network, as they control the wealth of this quote unquote capitalist system, which is 100% dependent upon money printing and a debt-based Ponzi scheme. But of course you say, yes, we want, this is capitalism. That's the way to do it. But they can use it for political suppression. They can use it for capital controls, but of course, private capital controls. In China, the capital controls are to make sure that the money is reinvested in China. Here, it's about capital controls to make sure that the money flows up to the banks and financial institution and the proof of weapons network, so they can asset strip you of everything, so that you end up with a 50-year mortgage, a 100-year mortgage, an infinite mortgage, and you will own nothing and be happy. And so the US is essentially trying to centralize Bitcoin as a counter as well. They're doing that by saying, we're going to be the crypto capital of the world. We're going to build our stable coins. We're going to tokenize everything. And then we're going to launch Bitcoin ETFs, and we're going to get millions and millions of Bitcoin. And we're going to get you to put it in your 401k. And then we're going to ask you to borrow against it, so that we can centralize as much Bitcoin in the American side, so that eventually, if they ever want to seize, use it as collateral, then they can do that through the ETFs. Now, those with Bitcoin in self-custody, is your mission is to get as much into self-custody so that you can decide where you want to go. Your wealth comes with you. You can own your own money. You can spend your own money, and you can benefit from the fact that there is a fixed supply that will never change. Now, they will create paper Bitcoin, but the real Bitcoin will be the premium Bitcoin, which is why you got to get as much into self-custody by owning more Bitcoin every month. And also, of course, you can do it with gold. But when you're trying to escape countries with gold, it's a lot harder to come with you. And people find it hard to custody it at scale. And so they end up in ETFs. That's the challenge. But it will still protect you. Gold is useful for that. And Bitcoin is in self-custody is how you protect yourself. Now, obviously, the US is really pushing stable coins. So JP Morgan is essentially testing, as we speak, private blockchain stablecoins. Now, remember, JP Morgan, the bank lobby, was the one that got Ingenious Act that you have to have a banking license in order to use the Federal Reserve accounts as collateral to issue trillions of dollars of stablecoins. And then you can have a covert central bank digital currency for the benefit of JP Morgan. And then they can incentivize you to use it because those that have a banking license get to pay yield. And so they can utilize the debt capital markets, pay you some of the yield, and incentivize you into this private blockchain that they're looking to do. Now, they're hedging just in case that doesn't work, because they tried to do that in Nigeria and it didn't get the adoption. Obviously, they need to create fear. That's why you're getting access. That's why you're getting more violence, a multi-decade operation to manufacture violence, as we covered a couple of weeks ago, last week, in Nigeria. I won't go into that now, but I covered that last week in the geopolitical section. But to hedge that, they also have BlackRock, who's now going all in on public chains and acquiring more companies. One of the companies that I invested in many years ago was a company called Securitize, a Bank to the Future, the company I founded. We funded over 100 of the largest companies. One of them was Securitize, and they started going into security tokens. And BlackRock wants to tokenize everything. So they're investing in companies like Securitize. They've now made them go public at a $1.5 billion valuation. And they're getting those BlackRock investments, and they want to do it on public chains. And so while companies will benefit from these public chains, what else is BlackRock doing? Well, BlackRock is obviously also launching the ETH ETF, because Bitcoin is proof of work, so it protects you from those that own the Bitcoin controlling the network. Proof of stake doesn't. Proof of stake means if you stake your ETH, you get a vote in the governance of the network. So they're going all in on the public chains while they build the Bitcoin ETF so they can have the largest vote. And they're using other nodes in their network, like Cantor Fitzgerald, to launch stable coins and custody those treasuries so they can dump more and more of the US debt at subsidized interest rates. Covered that last week. And then at the same time, have those stable coins where they can control the stake behind the network through the ETFs. This is why Bitcoin's proof of work and the vast hash power and its distributed supercomputer, which is hosted outside of America, while 40% are mining in America, BlackRock's trying to centralize the entire American infrastructure. But fortunately, America doesn't control all the infrastructure. You've got competing countries, and that's very, very important that we remain that. You know, remember Trump? He said, we want Bitcoin to be made in America. That's basically for BlackRock. He works for BlackRock and the financial industrial complex who want to centralize Bitcoin. You can read the clues because it's BlackRock's policy, who was also, in my opinion, the creator of the tariff policy to reset the world order. We're covering more about that in the macro section as well. So one of the companies we invested in, and I invested in early, ended up going public, which is Coinbase. And now Coinbase, what are they doing? They're launching their pre-launch token securities platform. Basically, the company I co-founded, Bank to the Future, we sold our US brokerage when all of this surveillance was happening. And we saw this. We ended up selling our brokerage to Coinbase. We exited our operational business. And now it looks like they're using that to do pre-launch security tokens. And so, you know, we're starting to see why they bought that. And we were exiting because we want everyone to go to Bitcoin in self-custody and not drive people around these merry-go-round of distractions of security tokens and all the other stuff. At the same time, staking ETFs can now pay out yield. So BlackRock can now try and incentivize you not to stake your own ETH, but to stake your ETH with them so that they can then pay out the yield. The regulators gave that permission in this deregulation environment. And so now you can get yield on your ETH ETF. They are doing everything they can to control the network and incentivize people. Now, at the same time, what did I tell you? I was warning everyone about the Bitcoin treasury companies. If you're a long-term listener, you wouldn't have touched any of them. But the Bitcoin treasury, the most successful one that has centralized 650,000 Bitcoin, that is a Wall Street puppet called Strategy, which has got massive debt products that within that structure, as well as the equity products. Their net asset value, i.e., the value of the Bitcoin that they hold relative to their share price, has been sending people a little bit loopy because they go below one. Now, for many of the other Bitcoin treasury companies, it has gone below one. At the same time, within the proof of weapons network is a bunch of plausible deniability hedge funds. When they had regulations that said you can't take proprietary trading at the same time as creating dollars and making books, they just have a network of investing in hedge funds. And you send these hedge funds out there as dollar vigilantes and bond vigilantes, and they can short stocks and make public announcements. They can, implement and basically manipulate the price of shares by through these strategies. You give them vast access. They started shorting many of Strategy, and there's been a bit of a fight between Michael Saylor and some of those that are shorting the stock, buying Bitcoin and shorting the stock. And so you see this often on X, which is just a financial weapon of mass destruction that says, as I've always said, if Saylor has a public company and he utilizes debt capital markets, he's owned by Wall Street. And so they send out their hedge funds and they basically say, be a good boy or we'll kill your price. We'll give you a B- rating on S&P. We ain't going to let you get into the S&P index fund until you comply more. And we'll knock you off your boots. And if we want to send you into Chapter 11, we'll manufacture a pump and dump cycle, a liquidation cycle, and we'll just own you and we'll buy it at below discount net asset value. Wall Street is not a free market. It is a captured market for the benefit of the proof of weapons network to extract value from you over to them. And that's why the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, and more assets are consolidating into fewer and fewer hands and more value as well. So what do they need next? They need Clarity Act. They got the Genius Act. Now they need Clarity Act. And we had the Clarity Act draft that came out, essentially giving the CFTC, the CFT is the Commodities and Futures Trading Commission. That is the regulatory oversight body of commodities. Now, historically, when they were doing the engineered pump and dump and they tried to wipe out the crypto market, they used the SEC and Gary Gensler as their weapon through Operation Choke Point 2.0. Then they engineered the Biden administration bear market attack on crypto, and then got the Bitcoin ETF, and then got all the banks in, started taking out the crypto-friendly banks, started getting their own, installed Trump. Trump does the crypto-friendly environment, tells everybody we're going to have a Bitcoin strategic reserve. There's no Bitcoin strategic reserve other than confiscating Bitcoin so far. Now, the SEC is the one that was saying these are securities. The crypto scams, which are securities, the crypto scams, which is a Silicon Valley industry in order to extract Bitcoin from you, and the meme coins and all the other things to turn you into degenerate gamblers rather than long-term buying Bitcoin each month. So the SEC basically has always had, when we had a brokerage, we wanted to democratize investing, but eventually, we worked with US, we could only do accredited investors. You end up making the rich richer. Fortunately, we got so many people rich with Bitcoin that they ended up becoming accredited investors so they could invest in many of the companies. But as the surveillance started getting higher and higher and higher, we sold the brokerage to Coinbase, and now they're doing it there. But anyway, the difference between the CFTC and the SEC is a couple of things. It's the accredited investor rule. Now, with the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, the CFTC, they don't have any accredited investor rules. So you can buy gold as anybody, average Joe Schmo. And I don't mind that. I think that's a good thing. However, the Securities and Exchange Commission, they say you have to be high net worth And then they have different types of rules around that and those compliance. It helps the rich get richer and the poor get poorer by just saying you're too poor to invest type thing. And so with the CFTC, they don't have that. Now, that's good, deregulation, but at the same time, what goal does it achieve? It gets more and more people into crypto scams so that they can centralize even retail money on top of, which will always be the wealth extraction. They also have another rule, which is seasoning rules. What this essentially does is it prevents crypto tokens, going live from day one. All the big scams that they happen in the SEC, you can't do that because you have like a 1 year lock-in. There's different rules. It can't trade after 1 year, and there's all these different rules you have to comply with. With the CFTC, you can trade from day one. So now they can get retail investors, pump and dump schemes via Silicon Valley VCs to dump crypto tokens, get as much Bitcoin, and then centralize that Bitcoin with the ETF infrastructure and use the hedge funds to come after it as well. And so that is basically why they're going for the CFTC. Now, they want to set all these rules during the Trump administration. And obviously, they're going to be engineering regime change in 2028, and that's baked into it anyway. So the CFTC, it basically doesn't have those seasoning requirements. And so, I believe in more free markets, but I just want people what comes with free markets is education. So you got to understand these different moves, and you got to play the opposite of the game. And the simple game is own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month. So anyway, Clarity Act is likely to move into Senate next week. And this is the plan to centralize as much Bitcoin in America for the proof of weapons network and make sure that you don't own it in self-custody. They've also started looking at things like making sure you can't use coin joins. We covered more of this last week. And also unique wallet addresses for every transaction. And again, this is why jurisdiction matters, self-custody matters, and understand that, just getting through via the simple Bitcoin in self-custody. So the US is now testing more and more seizures. So if you look at the entire Bitcoin strategic reserve, none of it was acquired. And they said the promise to the Bitcoin community when Trump came in was that they're going to build Bitcoin strategic reserve, and there was a Bitcoin Act, and they were going to buy 1 million Bitcoin. What they forgot to say is that actually we're going to steal 1 million Bitcoin. And so this is why you got to be aware. The government's not your friend. Many people fell for the PSYOP. Wall Street's not your friend. Many people are falling for the PSYOP. Fortunately, we got BitcoinHardTalk, so you don't need to fall for these things. So we're seeing that right now. What happened this week? So China came out and accused the US of seizing 127,000 stolen Bitcoin that are valued at today's price. Has been a correction, or last week's price anyway, $13 billion, and caused to and they called it a state level hack. Now, I've always been suspicious that whenever they say China's hacking or Russia's hacking or North Korea's hacking, knowing what I know, it's probably via one of their nodes like Israel that has all the cybersecurity and illegal activities for the proof of weapons network and many of those hacking operations. I personally believe that's how it's done. I don't have any evidence. That's just speculation. But obviously, China now was accusing the US of hacking those Bitcoins in order to seize them. And so immediately, the US came out and said, hey, we've got now 300,000 Bitcoins in our Bitcoin strategic reserve. So Bitcoin basically came from what this was. It was a scam, and there was global victims. There were many in China. There were some in America. There were victims all around the world, but it was a scam that happened in, I think it was Cambodia was where they were located, but it was a global scam. And basically it was coming from like forced labor, scam. And basically it was networks that were run all across Southeast Asia. And it was these rings that had like all these different types of groups. I didn't read through all the different things. You get the point. But anyway, it was basically something called Cambodia's Prince Group, and basically they defrauded victims worldwide. And that was Chinese citizens. So China was coming after it. The Department of Justice was also coming after it. And basically, China wants the US to return all of those Bitcoins to the victims. And so they were saying, this isn't our Bitcoin. This isn't your Bitcoin. This is victims' Bitcoin. And that's how it's meant to work. Now, the US Department of Justice has now seized the 127,000 Bitcoin. It was done via a partnership between the US and the UK doing an investigation. And basically, from what we can tell right now, the US is just saying, we're going to keep them. And we're just going to forfeit the Bitcoin under something called the criminal proceeds laws. Now, this is the type of thing I'm talking about. Be very careful what you ask for. The criminal proceeds laws come into force. Why? Because you scare people through engineered civil unrest. And in order to protect you and save you and to protect from the money laundering, they give you more and more control structures. Now, what do? They control it. And rather than giving it back to the victims, they keep it for themselves. Now, obviously, the government is captured by the proof of weapons network and the private banks. So they'll use it as collateral, just like they do America's gold. It ends up on the Federal Reserve balance sheet as Bitcoin becomes more and more of a strategic asset. It won't be used to save the country. It will be used to bail out, socialize the losses and privatize the gains to the banks. That much is a guaranteed. Of course, Trump's putting on the whole narrative that we're going to build Bitcoin strategic reserves to save the dollar and make America great again. What is America? The same as UK, same as Europe. It is owned by the banks and financial institutions through ultra financialization, securitization, and now tokenization, as well as stable coins and central bank digital currencies. So China came out and basically called this a confiscation and theft by the US. And so you get these different types of narratives. And everyone says, we're the Americans, we're taking on China, we'll just keep the Bitcoin. So the Americans are cheering it on, saying we'll steal victims' Bitcoin. All is fair in love and war were the types of comments I got on my X. And I know what it's like. I've been involved in these, I helped a bunch of victims that had 120,000 Bitcoin that was stolen through the Bitfinex exchange, do a recovery plan so they can get their Bitcoin back. Who's got those Bitcoin? They belong to the shareholders. The US has got them. So the Department of Justice has over 100,000 Bitcoin that was stolen from the victims that then became shareholders, and they haven't given those Bitcoin back. They just keep them in this particular case. And this is what happened, for example, during Celsius. They put it in a bankruptcy process, just like they will with the treasury companies. And in Chapter 11, you become a bitch for the lawyers. The system was built for lawyers, by lawyers. They spend client money. They sell all the assets off to their buddies in Silicon Valley and venture capital, and they construct companies that have their buddies in, and then they give themselves 5-year jobs in order to manage these assets. I've been through all of this before. I speak from experience. You don't have to make these mistakes. And I know you believe in the system, but I worked in the system. I know what Wall Street's like because I was one of those people. Like, I left the system in 2006 to help people understand how this system works. Well, anyway, the Bitcoin strategic reserve so far is being done purely by seizure rather than purchase. And they will tell you whatever you need to hear in order to believe, and they lie to you. Everything is a lie. Every accusation is a confession. When they say China's building a social credit score, they mean we're building a social credit score. When they say China's doing a genocide, they mean we're doing a genocide. When they're saying China is a surveillance state, they mean we're building a covert surveillance state. It's all happening in China, but China doesn't hide it. America does hide it. And they have covert operations, and it's all done for privatization rather than reinvesting it back into the people. So we are now told that the US Bitcoin strategic reserve is 325,000 Bitcoin worth $36 billion. And if they returned the Bitfinex coins, and if they returned the coins to victims, the people that actually own that Bitcoin, then they would have less Bitcoin than China. So they want to keep the Bitcoin. But as I said, it would just be collateralized into the financial industrial complex that controls the system anyway. So all of it was from seizures. Where were those seizures? They're not buying Bitcoin. And basically, it was from criminal forfeitures. So as I said, we had Bitfinex, which was about 100,000 of the Bitcoin, which should belong to shareholders. I'm one of those shareholders. Silk Road, which was obviously the illegal drug market. The Trump administration, in order to scam Bitcoiners into thinking that he's helping us, he pardoned Ross Ulbright as well. And maybe that came with keeping some of the seizures, whatever it was. Now, obviously, that was criminal activity, and it wasn't victims because people were engaging in illegal activities. But the Southeast Asia scam was just 100% victims. And so the US says that forfeiture is standard law enforcement practice. They're setting the rules so that you cheer them on, saying we're going to make America great again and have a bunch of Bitcoin for our national security, so that they can set the rules that they will then use against you. You've got to be smarter. We've seen this time and time again. So basically, China says that the victims are being deprived of stolen property. They called it state-sponsored Bitcoin theft. And everyone says, but we only care, China's the one that we need to concern ourselves with. Right, what about in the Middle East? What's happening in the Middle East? So let's go around the world. So we've done Europe, we've done a bit of UK, we've done a little bit of China, we've done a little bit of America. What about the Middle East? The one that's going to be sat in the middle between the rising power China and the falling empire in the West. Well, that is part of the Gulf countries. We cover them a lot more in the geopolitical section. But Dubai did a seizure of stable coins. Now, this was theft. This is why stable coins exist. It's an innocent until proven guilty system. And if crime is committed, they can be seized because they are a digital currency that exists on a blockchain that you can spend on an innocent until proven guilty system, but then they can seize them when there is activities. That's why they're good for spending, but they're not good for saving. That's why Bitcoin and self-custody sits in the saving bucket. Basically, there's a new Dubai court, especially for digital assets. Now, remember, the stable coins with the Trump administration are being built to facilitate capital outflows from America over to the Middle East in tax-neutral jurisdiction. And then they're doing things like investing in Binance and the exchanges so that they can have tax neutrality and be at the center of the world as the geopolitics comes out. We'll cover more about that in the geopolitical section. But they basically froze $456 million of stable coins, and they were linked to Justin Sun's bailout of True USD. The issuer of the company that was issuing them was Teach3 X, and they were custodied via a company in Hong Kong, which is First Digital Trust. That I was a shareholder in that company in order to support custody in Hong Kong as well. But they have been seized, so limit your stablecoin exposure. Just think about whatever they beta test is what they bring back to America as we enter into this privatized surveillance state, 1984 Orwellian nightmare with full government control in Europe and UK, with the profits coming up to the stable coins and the tokenize everything to get it right into the hands of the corporations in America that are then deploying that capital over to the Middle East and recognizing that there is global shifts as manufactured civil unrest happens across the West, so they can acquire the assets on the cheap. So what about Czech Republic? So what about these European countries? Well, one of the countries, Czech, the central bank, which is a member of the Bank for International Settlements, tested buying Bitcoin and stables and digital assets. The Czech National Bank, they did a beta test where they bought $1 million for testing. Now, I'm not sure whether Europe is going to allow this to happen, or whether they want to put one of their nodes in the proof of weapons network to try and get as much Bitcoin so they can put it back to the network through the Bank for International Settlements up to the Fed and the privatized seizure by the banks. But maybe this is something that we need to keep watching. Basically, if a government wants to free itself from the central bank, but when the central bank buys it, that goes up to the privatized interest as well. But basically, they're exploring whether they could do up to 5% of their reserves. I looked at the Czech National Bank, CMB. I think this would be worth approximately $7 billion, 5% of their reserves. Basically, they're looking at whether they can plan to experiment with having Bitcoin as a reserve asset for the central bank. So meanwhile, on the adoption side, so that's what the governments and the Wall Streets and the proof of weapons network are doing. Meanwhile, there are a bunch of companies that are pushing some type of adoption. In America, you had Cash App. They announced that they're going to be allowing their customers to pay over Bitcoin. And they're going to be using Rails that is using USD balance, convert it into USD on top of Bitcoin, and letting them pay anyone in Bitcoin and using Lightning Network. This is brilliant. This is the type of thing we like to see. This is using the right network, proof of work, rather than proof of stake that can be controlled and centralized. And so the company Block Square, which is Jack Dorsey, who used to own Twitter, he's allowing merchants to pay with Lightning Network as well. He's always been pushing, he's got an interesting story. He was obviously part of the early circles of PayPal mafia, ended up creating Twitter. Then Twitter, once it goes public, it becomes on the net, part of the proof of weapons network. He then escaped the network. X ended up buying. Who did X do? X would borrow against his Tesla stock, privatize it, and then co-opt it with the Gulf countries. And then the banks would lend money against the X stock so that if they want to control Elon Musk, like maybe he starts talking about Epstein and Trump and various other things, you can knock his share price down by using financial weapons of mass destruction and then signal capital flows over to Oracle. And now suddenly Elon Musk isn't the richest man in America. Larry Ellison is the richest man in America. But then you knock it back down and you take their net worth down as a signal, don't mess with us. And obviously they gave him the American arm of TikTok so that they could control the algorithm as a technical weapon of mass destruction for the technical industrial complex. But they construct the financial products so that you can control all of these private companies and make sure they stand in line to the agenda. Now, one of the banks, SoFi, which I believe was part of Mike Cagney. Maybe I got this one wrong, but I think Mike Cagney was part of that, who just launched Figure. Figure is a tokenized security token exchange that just went public on NASDAQ. Let me know in the comments if I got that one wrong. But anyway, they are a fully chartered bank, and they're going to be offering crypto trading, whatever that means, whether it's Bitcoin and the crypto market. But now within your bank, you can offboard from your bank, convert it into crypto, and then get it in self-custody, hopefully. So we'll keep watching what those integrations happen. Obviously, more and more banks are going to be doing that. They'll be adding it to their balance sheet, and then they can create paper version of it. And the one in self-custody will become unique in this two-tiered Bitcoin system now that Wall Street's in the game. A couple of the companies that I invested in early, Coinbase and Robinhood, that are now part of the proof of weapons network because they went public. Coinbase and Robinhood, I invested in when they were private. They're fighting to basically get their bank charters. So you got the legacy fintech banks in the network already that are getting their ability to build their Bitcoin and crypto services, while the old crypto native companies are going to be getting their bank charters. That was the point of Genius Act, to make them banks so that they can join the proof of weapons network and join the system as well. So if you can't beat them, join them. That's why Operation Choke Point 2.0 happened. Anyway, what is going to be happening next? I'm seeing more. I've invested in over 100 companies, and I'm getting more and more knocks of mergers and acquisitions. Personally, I'm taking off all my private equity now that the proof of weapons network is in full force, and I'm converting that into Bitcoin in self-custody whenever liquidity becomes available. So, we sold our operational business to Coinbase. We've got a bunch of assets, and when liquidity becomes available, I'll be converting all that private equity as it becomes public, and then selling it off for dollars, pulling out at dollars and buying Bitcoin in self-custody. And we're seeing mass mergers and acquisitions, which was the goal of Operation Choke Point 2.0, and the tariff policy was to consolidate power up to the largest corporations in a K-shaped economy, and reset the world order so that everybody, the smaller companies, pay the tariff tax, end up going bankrupt and getting gobbled up by the larger companies. And then they're consolidating more and more power as well. Anyway, own Bitcoin in self-custody, simplify your life, own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month, self-custody it. Don't worry about price. Whatever happens to the price, the more the price goes down, the more you get to buy with your fiat currency. And you just get to have a peaceful resistance of the proof of weapons network using peaceful proof of work. On X, everyone will be panicking. They'll be telling you it's over, all this type of stuff. Remember, you are in a game for the next 5 years. If you accept this challenge, 4 years, let's say, I've been challenging everyone to 4 years to get as much Bitcoin as you can through your fiat currency, and ending up with Bitcoin in self-custody, and then deciding how you're going to manage things from there. So that is everything for this week in Bitcoin. I hope you enjoyed it. We're going to be moving over to part 2, this week in macro. Now, we've got a lot to cover with this week in macro, because the main subject is we're going to be going through, are these 50-year mortgages a bank bailout, how to utilize them, and also, is there really an AI bubble? And what is actually driving these valuations, and why is there a correction at the moment? So do me a favor. I'm just going to have a little quick sip of water. If you're enjoying this, please retweet it on X, and put a comment in the bottom. Give me a like, and I'll be going straight into this week in macro part 2.